A piece of what I want to bring to parent coordination is restoring kind of normalcy to a kid's life in what has become a profoundly distorted, adversarial, hostile, non-child-centric family environment, all the while both parents are carrying a flag that they represent the child's best interests.
You've developed a self-awareness of who you are and where you want to go. But now what? Sound familiar? In my 20 years of practice as a Superior Court Mediator, clinician, executive coach, and parent, I've noticed one thing above all. No meaningful transformation can happen unless you find and apply the tools and skills that are right for you. See, the thing is, without tools, without a recipe, you might as well flip a coin and hope it works. Or you'll get burnt out listening to bad advice and following tips that just aren't useful in your situation. I have been there, and I've seen thousands of clients right there as well. My name is Deepa, and Recipes for Life is my show where you and I learn the ingredients of high-performing, well-adjusted humans, how they get through their own life, all to craft a recipe for life of our own. Today's guest is David Donner. David threw me quite a curveball when he sent me his resume. It was quite long. You can find the details of David's credentials in the show notes, but for now, I want to share a few key themes with you and let them simmer. 38 years as a top-tier family, juvenile, and probate litigation lawyer for some of the most intense cases I've ever heard of. Expert in trial and alternative dispute resolutions involving child custody and probate court. Judge pro tempore of the San Francisco Superior Court since 1998. Settlement master in the Unified Family Court, frequently appointed as special master, parenting coordinator, and minors counsel in high conflict cases. I could go on. Seriously, we'll link David's resume in the show notes. It's worth a read. So where did our conversation go? Given all of his background expertise, I like to think that we were able to provide just a glimpse into the vast and mostly hidden world of child custody disputes and parent conflicts in and out of the court system, and how there's always hope, no matter how difficult the situation. David shared about how he works with parents to help address their anxieties and in turn increase their capacities to listen better. He provided tools on how to reduce your reactivity in high-stress situations and stay human-focused during the most difficult disputes that you might ever encounter. Above all, David reminds us that throughout this conversation, that in any dispute or conflict, by definition, where there's a winner and a loser, and for a small child growing up, after that dispute, they'll be constantly reminded that one of their parents won and the other lost. He believes that we can break this cycle by becoming child-centered in our disputes instead of conflict-centered. His optimism here is truly a breath of fresh air. As an added bonus, we also explored what reality testing is and how you can apply it to your own life and expectations around conflict. This is one of my personal favorites. Before we jump into the episode, I have one ask. Teach what you've learned to someone you care about within 48 hours. Here's the versatile and creative lawyer in the field of child custody disputes, David Donner. So I actually want to start with something that you said earlier, and I'm so curious about this. You said in your 38 years of legal practice, you, for the very first time, don't have finished all your work for December, all emails sent, everything done. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like you said, I'm set for the month of December, which is kind of very interesting to me. And I'll tell you why after you speak.
Yeah, no, how do I account for it, I think is the question. And I think it's multifactorial, Deepa. So I think one piece of it was setting an intention. I mean, some of this I enunciated to people, some of it, but I was very clear within myself of how I wanted December to look. And I needed a reboot. I needed really some time on some difficult cases where I didn't want the press. It's not always a crisis. I just didn't want the press of the casework. I actually wanted to be able to think about the kids and the families and the issues and the conflict and sink into thinking so I can plan and think about possible solutions. And I was very proactive in the run-up in the fall with families and telling them, I want to get, kind of what's up, what do you anticipate, conflicts are coming. And I kind of I said, let's go into the holidays without a bunch of last minute struggle. Let's everybody have a real holiday. And also let's have a holiday from this conflict. Let's have a holiday from me. Have a holiday from me billing you. Have a holiday, put more money into the family estate and into your kids' education funds. I mean, and I said various pieces of this to various parents and to lawyers. So a piece of it was just really getting out in front and anticipating where might there be conflict, what could be deferred to next year, and then just asking people, you've put this on my plate. And, the holidays are coming. Is this really the optimal time for us to address this? I've heard it's an issue, but would we be any worse off if we faced this in January or February, kind of refreshed and rested? And I've got a surprising number of, oh, what a nice idea.
Yeah. Yes.
And so just, so I think that's a piece of it. I don't know. Some of it probably has to do with how I've stacked up the cases and maybe people who are a little less needy and, try to put cases on my caseload that are less demanding in that way. I had a period and I sometimes can be a little glib.
Sometimes?
Just sometimes. And I actually had a provision in my retainer and fee agreement. And I said, hiring a parent coordinator is not a 7-Eleven for parental conflict.
Did you do that in bold?
Yeah. And then it was too cute and I took it out. But I said to my assistant today, I said, maybe we restore that paragraph for new cases because it's lighthearted and it communicates something to people. Because there is this potential iatrogenic effect, to use a big fancy polysyllabic word, of the intervention potentially breeds a new set of problems, which is people feel that because you're there, they're entitled and there's a forum for their conflicts. And I don't, I like to pride myself on I'm part of a solution and not part of a problem. So I don't want to be creating one.
Right. And that's a fair point you bring up. I mean, it seems like this year specifically, very strategically, there's a couple of things or a few things that you've done to set yourself in a position that you find yourself in right now, which is I am done with all my backlog and work and I'm not dealing with holiday conflict because I set an intention almost 6-8 months ago to get parents to start talking about this and get ahead of this so we can all have a nice holiday without the conflict.
Right. And in one or two cases, it's funny because we serve families, right?
Yeah.
And it's, but I would joke, there's a piece of humor here, which is, how much can people have some aspect of lightheartedness about the predicament they're in? And when they can, I would joke with them and I would just say, this is about me. It's not about you, and give me a good holiday this year. Let's work on that. And they understood that I'm attentive to them and I'm going to address a real conflict if it exists. But the underlying message is, can we ratchet this down? And if they can ratchet it down for a week, right? Sometimes it's very important to know where to calibrate and where to aim. If they could ratchet it down for 2 weeks successfully, I then can make use of that later with this family. Remember when we decided, because a lot of people don't understand this about parent coordination. If you really focus on the words, parent coordination, well, a piece of what we're doing as PCs is we're also coordinating their conflict. So for people who are in perpetual conflict or frequent conflict, you want to order the conflict because you're trying to create a sense of order and reduce a sense of chaos and reduce acrimony and adversarial, fighting. And so a piece of that is you're trying to impose some order. And so I will say to somebody, that's a bona fide issue. That's a bona fide dispute. And here we're going to, I'll create a 90-day timeline, or it'll incubate. I'll say, you go talk to your parenting coach, you go generate dialogue with the other parent and come back to me in a month. And then I will contemplate whether or not this rises to the level of something that I'm going to, issue a decision or an order on. So a piece of it is coordinating their conflict. And I've become more explicit with parents and lawyers, not so much the lawyers because they get it, but I've been more explicit with the parents that this is what I'm doing. I'm not just doing parent coordination, I'm doing conflict coordination.
Oh my Lord, conflict coordination. I want to dive so deep into that. But before we do that, let's provide some context to our audience. So speak a little bit about parenting coordination and speak a little bit about how you see your role as a parent coordinator.
The first part's the easy part. So and I think in fairness, if I had 2 or 3 of my colleagues here to my right and my left, and I'll create my imaginary, consultation group.
Uh-huh.
And thinking about how I don't know that you would get a uniform answer to the question. So let me start with that. And for people that are watching this, lawyers and lay people, right?
Yeah.
There is online, there's an organization called AFCC. We don't need to get into what it stands for, but they have model guidelines for parent coordination. And that document is a wonderful document as a baseline on what the work is. So now I'm going to answer your question rather than shovel off people to the internet. But I wanted to get that plug in there just because it's such a thoughtful, meaningful document that all of us in the field rely on. In the family law world, right, people get divorced, or people who aren't married and have children part. Parents need to sort out custody and visitation. And if they can't do that between themselves, right, they end up in court. And most cases resolve long before it gets to a parenting coordinator. So in terms of a bell curve, parent coordination is very, very far out on the far reaches of conflict, because some people, never go to a court or hire a lawyer, and they sort out, these are our kids, we had this kid, and they figure it out. And then some people hire a lawyer, and then the lawyers maybe talk to each other, and they figure it out. Or they go to court, and they have a court visit or 2 court visits. The judge issues some orders, and people live with those orders, implement them, and make do. So we haven't even gotten near where a parenting coordinator comes in. So these are the way that cases fall off. And then there's the people that have abiding conflicts over custody or visitation of their kids. And I don't want to speak poorly of parents who find themselves in that situation, because there's a way to say, oh, there's something wrong with them, right? And we pathologize the parents. And sometimes, yes, there are unions of people that are where I would say where sometimes the whole is much worse than the sum of the parts. Mom is troubled, dad may be troubled, but if you put those 2 troubles together, it's nuclear fission. And then those people had 1, 2, or 3 or 4 kids. and they can't get unentangled. They can't get out of the conflict. And then there's real world problems that affect families. There's mental health issues. There are substance use issues. There are impulse control / intimate partner violence issues. And these are issues that are hard to manage, that require often the state, the court, intervening with orders and measures because people can't get it solved between themselves.
Right. They need support. They need help.
They need help. And then so for some people, rather than returning to court and generating the legal fees and all the limitations that are in the court system, it's expensive. The judges have an incredible caseload. They have limited time to hear the case. And it's not that they don't, there's no diss on judges here, but it's just if you've got 30 or 40 matters on your morning calendar, you can't give that special needs kid who happens to have an alcohol abusing parent, you can't give that case the 3 hours it might need to fully hear what are the issues and arguments. All of this is a long-winded way of saying parent coordination exists as an alternative. It is in the tent of alternative dispute resolution for people that want to step outside of the courtroom and hire a professional who's knowledgeable about custody, who can be a lawyer or a mental health professional, who's had the requisite training to adjudicate certain disputes around custody. And it moves, theoretically, it moves the lawyers to the back seat. It moves the judge. The court always retains oversight.
Of course, right.
But it's an alternative dispute resolution system that has varying degrees of formality and in terms of how legalistic it is, how touchy-feely it is. And some of that turns on who's the parent coordinator, what's their style, what's their training, what's their belief system about how to ameliorate and address conflict. And then some of it is what do the people bring to it. So on the spectrum on that, there's parents who disagree with each other, but they're able to sit in a room together. They can sit on a Zoom together and engage with the PC about should Johnny go to a private or public school? Does art camp or science camp make more sense? I'm just kind of manufacturing hypothetical disputes. There's other people who, because of their antipathies or the suffering of genuine trauma, of domestic violence, can't even be in the Zoom together. The mere seeing the picture on the screen is traumatizing.
Yes.
And so then the parent coordinator steps in to talk, to do caucusing, talk to one parent, talk to the other parent. I mean, back in the old days, pre-Zoom, I used to sometimes put people on two lines and would go back and forth so that I wouldn't lose them and have to redial, but could go back and forth on the A and B line to get something done. Or in the old days, there'd be, you had an office with multiple conference rooms. So I'd put mom upstairs and dad downstairs, and I would go back and forth and then perhaps negotiate, can we sit together for 5 minutes? With the assurance that at 5 minutes, we're going to all go back to our corners. And it's a way of titrating content. There's all sorts of tools that you had, but now with Zoom, you accomplish much of the same effect, but generally not sitting in a room with people anymore. So parent coordination is an alternative dispute resolution system. It's got some lofty goals. The idea is that at the end of a PC term, which is usually 2 years, the training wheels come off and the parents have acquired the skills to manage their conflict between themselves and no longer need the services of the parent coordinator. And this is explicit in the appointment orders. It sets forth, this is the goal. And sometimes we hit the goal, sometimes we miss it. Or sometimes we come close, right? It's not It's not a binary, you win, you lose, but you aim to have some pedagogical piece that people, by engaging with the PC and how the PC structures their engagement, that their anxieties are reduced, their capacities for listening are better, their reactivity is diminished, and you start to create a more humanistic, child-centered, rather than conflict-centered system, which is a restoration of what the family should have been in the first instance.
Right. And with the goal being that at the end of 2 years, or maybe sometimes before that, or maybe sometimes after that, that parents figure out a way to do this on their own without you being part of that process.
Correct. And so another piece of what the PC, and I'm going to use PC as for parent coordination, what the PC does is you're also sometimes you get cases that are staffed with a lot of other professionals. So a kid may have a therapist. There may be a family therapist. There could be an educational consultant. There could be people who are substance abuse specific. If somebody's on medications, there's a treating psychiatrist or treating psychiatrist. If it's parents and kids. So there's sometimes a multitude of professionals with whom you're working, but sometimes you just get the case. And so the PC is assessing who else can best serve this family. Sometimes I am a one-stop shop, and sometimes I am working with people to engage other service providers. And then the other piece of the parent coordination is you're also coordinating the services. So there's releases of information in these psychotherapeutic relationships that are often confidential, so that the PC can have some sense of, with whom are we working and what progress is being made on treatment goals. And so the services also get coordinated.
Right. For instance, if you and the parents agree that there's a specific need for a therapist to come into place, if there wasn't one, and then you are saying you're getting releases of information from the parents, so you can actually have a conversation with the therapist, and the therapist can also update you or talk to you about goals and progress that's being made without fully divulging the confidential information.
Yes, and care is taken about, because you're in the whole notion of for therapy to be successful as a parent has to have confidence, and I make
correct
in the privacy and the confidentiality of it. And I make very explicit, I put this into my releases often, that I will never ask for any specific communication that a parent has ever made to a mental health professional. I don't want to know.
Yeah, you just want to know the progress.
Progress, can issues be addressed? Is the parent, what's the quality of the relationship? Is it a meaningful therapeutic connection, or are wheels being spun? What could I do at my end to facilitate the engagement? A host of things, but it's all in the service of individual and familial functioning.
Now, can I just make a quick clarification? I could be wrong, just correct me, but people come to a point to a PC in the hopes that they'll be able to resolve all of this through the ADR process outside of the court system, and not to keep going back and filing with the court system and having a judge make a decision. So do you then make decisions for parents if they don't come up with decisions or agreements on their own?
Yeah, no, that's a important and loaded question. So the PC is an arm of the court.
Okay.
So on certain more substantive sorts of issues. So if I'm just deciding, Johnny gets dropped off at 3:00 on Friday rather than 9:00 on Friday. Or yes, Johnny can skip this weekend's visit to go to his cousin's slumber party. Those kinds of decisions might be memorialized in an email, but you don't generally pepper a court file with those. Those are decisions. They're court orders, but they're not, they're not of tremendous value, meaning. something that's more significant, that's more substantive. My practice is I do it in the form of a court order. If it's in my decision-making authority, I do it on the pleading paper, on the official paper, and it gets filed with the court so that if a judge later picks up that file, they have some sense of what's happened. There are other reasons to paper a court file.
Right.
So the idea is that they go to court last, but sometimes the PC process, again, can really look, there's an adjudicatory function. And I play it, and there is a judicial role, and sometimes a part of it is communicating to people which hat I'm wearing. So if I've got I'm the cool, let's solve the problem, my backwards baseball cap, which I don't wear, but that's kind of the approach. It's this soft, friendly, hand-holdy, collaborative, but I'm very clear with people like, okay, we now have a real dispute. I need to make a decision. All of the soft talk and trying to compromise, and do you see the other person's position? All of that has failed. There's actually a deadline. A decision needs to be made. And then it's the suit and tie PC, right? The baseball cap, the backwards baseball cap comes off. The suit and tie come on, and we talk about admissible evidence. And I set rules for people to respond to each other's emails. I don't want, personal antagonisms. We stay focused on the facts and the issues. And then there's a big piece of this is what lawyers love to talk about, due process. There needs to be an element, there needs to be a fundamental fairness that if any decision maker, it's not me, but as a decision maker, that each side has had the opportunity to hear and to know what's been presented to the decision maker, like a court. They have the opportunity to respond to allegations and to evidence. And there's even an opportunity to respond to the response. Generally, in the PC process, it's a softer process than the courtroom. So sometimes a parent will say, I want a fifth opportunity to respond to this argument. And there's some upside to letting everything be heard and then knowing when to cut it off.
Correct. Right. That's a skill.
And so that's an adjudicatory process. And then if the PC is doing more than just making the order, but explaining, right? Sometimes people want to know, and they can have a right to know. How did you get there? On what basis did you make this decision? So then there's a discussion of the evidence. What was the valence? What weight did you ascribe to, various pieces of evidence? Was the evidence credible? And that goes into a written decision. And then sometimes certain PC appointments, the PC doesn't have decision-making authority. They have recommending authority.
Right.
So that the parents keep the court as the backstop to then challenge and have the PC's recommendation reviewed. And that's really where they haven't fully escaped the court system.
Because they've chosen not to escape the court system, really.
They've chosen not to escape it. And sometimes the lawyers don't want them to escape it. They may not. There's an element of trust. Do they trust the PC fully? Where they're going to live with that PC's decision? Frankly, some PCs would rather write recommendations than orders so that the buck stops with the judge rather than the PC. They don't want to be on the hook for having made the order. And that gets into the structure of the PC agreement, which is largely determined by the lawyers and the parents, not so much by the PC.
So, David, here's a really fundamental question. And I'm thinking about my audience, people that might be listening, people in leadership, parents who are together, or parents who are recently separated, or students, or anybody. What are some of the things we all can do in life to not find ourselves in this high conflict situation?
No one listening to this video should ever be in that situation. And the good news is, let's start with the really good news. Which I'm just not so involved with good news. And so this is really good news. Most people are never going to be in that situation. So when I talk about that bell curve of divorcing families, and I'm not a social scientist, So I don't know but there are social scientists who could tell you, because it has been researched pretty thoroughly. The percentage of cases that are out at that far end of that bell curve, 1%, 2%, and then we have these, not so kind not euphemisms, but, we refer to, the court system will refer to them as frequent flyers, the people that are coming into court frequently.
Constantly, right.
Most cases aren't that. And I'm going to share an anecdote with you, because it's an expensive service, right? So it's a spendy service, and it's really, I don't know about 1% or 2%, but generally people, you're not working with the population, you're at least working with the top 10% and probably 5 or 2 or 1. Generally, I deal with, a lot of upper echelon business people of,
right.
A lot of people who have made a lot of money where they can afford their lawyers and the years of fighting and the many hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in legal
Millions
fees.
of dollars.
And then they figure out they want to have a PC. And a lot of these people will either be explicit or implicit. They're controlling people. And they're very used to having control in their lives. And I used to do a lot of road cycling and racing. And then there were this company had these really cool socks that would say, "You're not the boss of me." But nobody really saw the message until you took your shoes off. But these people are all people wearing socks, effectively, of "You're not the boss of me." And I had this guy who was a CEO of more than one company, actually. And he was really lamenting about, "I can't stand that I'm not in control." And I let him expend this, and I said, "You lost control a long time ago, and I am the culmination of really kind of your ultimate loss of control, and I will tell you how to get it back. If you really want control, you truly want control, let's talk about what you have to do or what you could do to get control back." But I said, the minute you hired a lawyer to handle your custody dispute, that was an incremental loss of control. The minute you and your lawyer and the other lawyer couldn't settle the case, and you went into court to press your position, and mom went into court to press her position, you took another rung into Dante's ring of hell of losing control. And when you did that a second time and a fourth time and a fifth time, and then decided you needed to commission a custody evaluation, which often goes into the 6 figures and takes a year, you lost further control. And then, because the conflict was unremitting and unabating, you and your ex-spouse finally came to your senses and decided to hire a PC to try to help you. However, that's a further relinquishing of control.
Right.
And I'm with you. I don't want this control. So how about you and I collaborate and talk about what are things you can do at you, and I'll have the same conversation with mom. So this isn't just you. Let's talk about how to restore you as a parent and your family to having the autonomy and control where you don't need professionals making decisions for you. And whether that professional is in a robe in a courtroom or it's a PC, I'm all for you having control. Let's talk about how you regain it.
And what was the next step after that? Like, what did he say to you, and what happened after that? And what are some of the ways that he regained control? I'm assuming he did, but that's just assumption.
Sadly, the conflict has been unabating. And one of the kids, who's a special needs kid, ended up in residential treatment, largely because they could not metabolize the parental conflict.
Wow.
And so you talk about further loss of control. Your kid is now in a facility where visits are monitored, and you can't pick up the kid and fly to the home in Aspen for the weekend. Nope. I know you think that would be a great thing, but your kid's got trouble regulating. And now this facility, at some point, I don't make jokes and I'm not glib with people because the suffering is too acute and too real. And it's not a time to be cute and make a point.
Of course not. And yeah.
One of the things both parents said to me in this case, and it was a point of agreement. So one thing that you look for as a PC, I mean, one thing I always ask parents, I'm digressing here a little bit, which is, when did things work well? And you really want to know that. And then you want to know what that looked like. You don't want to just take the answer. You want to know what, because, and this is what, and this relates more to my minors counsel work with representing kids. But I have this, there's this notion of, you don't want to tyrannize people with hope or tyrannize them with idealism.
Right.
How I think, or how a judge thinks, or how the system thinks your family ought to function and operate, if there's no history of operating or functioning at that level, is really unfair to families and parents. You've got to work within people's limitations. You can set a bar high, you can set an aspiration, you can set a goal, but you've always got to be mindful of who are the people you're working with and what are they actually capable of. So one thing these parents said to me, and this was a couple who could not talk to me together because it was so incendiary between them. And there had been no domestic violence in this family. No one had aggressed on each other that way. It was all psycho-emotional warfare. They each said to me, there's a court order that we have a co-parent counselor, which was part of why I took the case. I knew the co-parent counselor, and they were the best in town. And I thought, well, there's this service being provided. It'll make my job a little easier because I can send them to talk to the co-parent counselor, right? Each parent pleaded with me in the first meeting, can you please, get us unhooked, get us unhooked from the co-parent counseling. It's ineffective. I hate it. It's a waste of money. And each of them separately made their case to me. And I thought, I've got them agreeing to something. Now, what's interesting is they needed it, but they didn't want it. And I'm at the beginning of the case.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of like when you used to go back to school in the fall as a kid and the teacher would start very strict.
Yes.
And that's a little bit of the PC thing because it's a turf thing and who's in charge here. And so I had a decision to make of, do I acquiesce to the parents' wishes and request and put put that order on the shelf for the co-parent counseling? Or do I say, you know what, orders are orders, and you agreed to that order, and a court made that order, and my job, the primary job of a parent coordinator is to see that there's compliance with parenting plans and court orders. And so unbeknownst to them, they've done this amazing throwdown challenge right at the start of the case. And so I made a deal, and I said, look, you both want this, and I think you actually need this intervention. And I hear you that you're frustrated with it. You're frustrated with the provider. You feel it's wheel spinning. And it's really, this person is really, like, it's not the best in town. It's like the best person in the Bay Area. If they weren't getting the job done, it wasn't about fit. The parents, it was just an intervention because the court throws up its hands, right? It doesn't know. So these services get thrown at families hoping that something works and sticks. So I said, I'm willing to not enforce that order. But the two of you have got to behave. So I said, if you can't, and I said, if you're going to interrupt each other on calls, if you're going to continue to flame each other on emails, behave means you act civilly, you act respectfully. If I, put my hand up in a Zoom, it means stop talking. We're really talking first grade kind of behaviors here. And what's interesting is they absolutely didn't hold their end of the deal. Both of them.
They didn't. I was like,
no. And
I
then
was like, maybe they did.
yeah, no. And then I threatened them collectively and individually. I said, look, I said, you're not holding up your end of the deal.
Right.
And I said, I've got this order. I said, and I said, and I said, I don't want to, I said, you're suffering. I don't want you to suffer more. I want you to suffer less, but you're not honoring the deal. And we kind of stayed in that place for a while. And I said to them, I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And I said, I'm going to enlist you on what you think I should do. It was a little bit like a parent would do with a child. You misbehaved. What do you think the consequence should be? Right? Because I want them to have agency. It's limited now, but I still want them to have agency. It's their life. And then sadly, the kid, and then they agreed to this. The kid was melting down. The kid goes to residential treatment. And this is a case that is kind of, it's past. But the facility, and it was really sad with this girl going off into treatment. And the facility, about a month into it, the clinical director out of state calls me. And so I get a release to talk to the clinical director and the clinical team. And the clinical director says, whoa. He said, we do work with families, because it's clear that kids generally, it's not just their problem, it's a family problem. And the antipathy between these parents, he said, it's way beyond what our staff here can manage or handle. He said, can't you, as a PC, and this was a state that doesn't even have PCs, but this guy was pretty sophisticated and knew about them. He's a psychologist. He said, can't you or the court order some sort of co-parent counseling? And this is where another aspect of PCs, a PC is one of the few functions, right? You can be a lawyer and do this work.
Right.
And you can be a mental health professional and do this work. So it's conceivable that had these parents retained a psychologist to be their PC, that person would have had a different skill set and background and training than I do as a lawyer, and they could have brought a different skill set to the PC task where I have really elementary sort of chops in that way, but it's not my training. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist.
Right.
And I said, can you let the parents know that your facility is not going to be providing these services, so this is where I'm now coordinating with this provider to tee up a different intervention. So I said, I need you to educate them. Not that they need it, but what they're not apprehending is the deleterious effect of their conflict on the kid. They're not hearing it from me. I said, you now are in charge of this kid 24/7. If they're going to hear it from anyone, it's likely going to be you. And I said, I can be on the call with you. I can sit passively, so I'm also receiving the message, and we can all, there's this myth of, well, if we're all in the room together, we're all hearing the same thing. And judges especially love this myth. And it's a myth because people have got their stressors firing off, their traumas are firing off, and the same words are spoken, but rarely are people hearing the same thing. We orchestrated this meeting, and this clinical director, she was so astute and so articulate and so compassionate, and she talked to the parents about their daughter, and what endogenous sorts of issues the daughter was dealing with, but also in what ways the daughter had taken in the conflict and didn't have the tools to deal with the conflict, and how destabilizing it was. And this is a kid who was edging towards some suicidal ideation. These were real. I mean, this was really having an impact. And I teed up the clinical director. I said, you naively asked the question, about co-parent counseling, because it's going to, and they did. And then the parents looked at each other on the Zoom, kind of looked at me. And I said, well, I knew where I was going. I said, but I have an idea here. I said, I took on and I educated, I said, the parents made a good faith effort with co-parent counseling in the past, and it was not an effective intervention. So we don't want to repeat that. I said, but we need to do something. And so then, and that teed up the parents getting individual parent coaches, which neither of them wanted. But it became then an imperative for the treatment facility, because the treatment facility said, we're not, your conflict is way beyond what we can service. And then I said to the parents, I've failed. I've worked with you for years, and I haven't been able to move you beyond this. So let's try another intervention. And it was successful.
Okay. Wow.
So a very long road, but the kid, was released after a year and integrated back, into a shared custody situation. And then you're into the aspect of parent coordination, right? You're now coordinating services, you're coordinating service providers. You're not sending the parents out to hire a coach. I now know who they are. I knew who the pool of coaches are. And so I've got to think about a match with the parent and the coach, and then the two coaches need to be able to work well together and work with me as the PC. And so that's a piece of the bespoke handling of families that you're getting with a parent coordinator intervention. But that's 1 or 2%. Most people do not have that level of conflict. So back to your question that you asked me 17 minutes ago, which is, I will always try to remember your question, Deepa, which was, how do people avoid this? Because it's really, most people are not at risk for it.
Right. Okay. So let me rephrase that question now that we kind of got a chance to hear like that. It's just like the small percentage of people. Let's talk about the large percentage of people that are not, that, are still in adversarial court system or conflict resolution process or private mediation process. And let's talk about those people and what are some of the things that they can do to not get to a point where to go to a PC, because that's a large group of people that you or me see, where many of them come up with agreements, or some of them don't. But what are some of the tools and ways that people can do, or be in a way that they can reduce conflict in their lives?
Well, it's funny. The first thing that occurs to me is not the best approach, but it's where my mind went to first. So I'm gonna say this is not the best approach, but I've got to get the thought out of my head, and then I'll move on to more humanistic, productive approach, answers to your question. Is I think that if mediators and mental health professionals and lawyers and judges spoke more candidly about control, you want to, and parental autonomy and family functioning. And I do this as a PC, right? So even after they've lost all the control, right? And they're now with me, and they're in the PC process, I'll say this to people before, when they're feeling there's a big decision to make. And I'll say to them, I try to do it together. Do you really want me as an outsider? I'm never going to know your child the way you know your child. Never going to know your family the way you know your family. Do you really want me or some other third party, a judge, to be making this decision about your family life? And sometimes that's a tool to send them back out to talk to each other. And judges give this lecture to people all the time. I mean, because most family law judges don't want to be deciding all of the custodial issues that get presented to them. And sometimes you do need a decision maker, and they're not going to get it done. I think to bang the drum for agency, and to bang the drum for individual and parental autonomy, and to bang the drum for, let's, have you less leaning on and dependent on these service professionals to address conflict. What I'm getting at, the reason why I said it's not as I think it's fear. I think you want to kind of play on people and just say, boy, this is where this ends up. And I've did this when I was advocating and litigating custody cases. I would do this with clients before I would file that request for a custody evaluation. right? It's our job as lawyers to talk about the pros and cons, the upside, the downside. Because what the clients are always focused on is, well, they're going to win and there's going to be a positive outcome and it's going to lead because they're so convinced that they're right? Or they're so convinced that the system will be fair.
Or the judge will see it their way.
The judge will see it their way. And so part of the job, this is why lawyers get kind of this bad rep, it's like we're always delivering bad news to people. But I would say to them, I said, look, I agree. I think you've got a strong case. And I think that how you see your child is largely correct. And the other parent does have these problems. But let's assume that I'm 5% less of the lawyer you imagine me to be. And the judge is 5% less fair than we imagine them to be. And this doesn't go your way. So before I file this document, I want to be sure you understand all of the potential downsides to moving forward in the adversary system. And I want to be sure that you understand all of your options to ratcheting up the conflict. And once I'm clear that you've understood the downsides and all the options, I will then take the next step in the adversarial warfare. But that's how I lawyered. Other lawyers, do it very differently.
So, and I think you're the second person saying that, because I had another podcast episode, and Billy McQuay, she's a very well-known retired family court mediator from Alameda. She was the one who trained me in this mediation process. She pretty much also spoke about this being one of the tools of deterring and almost like a reality testing for parents to say, if you make this choice and these are all the things that are bound to happen that you're not going to like, there is no sure way of knowing that you'll get what you want. I can guarantee you that. Like just straight up like saying, this is one of the tools that actually was very effective for her in mediation, and people saying to her almost like saying, okay, just leave the room for 10 minutes, where people can actually sit in the room by themselves and say, we'll rethink this, or we'll revisit this, or we'll make a different choice because we don't want to be that.
You just really taught me something great. I love the leave the room for 10 minutes. And I'm going to steal that technique. No, because there's a way, right, that conversations get going and you're rolling. And I can sense if somebody's apprehended a point or something, but to actually interrupt a call or to interrupt a Zoom and say, you know what, let's break for a minute. I really want you to think about this, what we just said, and let's pick it up in 10 minutes.
And David, also, before we sort of, I want to ask you, oh gosh, so many questions, but here's another one. So one of the tools that you use is this reality testing, possibly a little bit fear-based, around just setting expectations of what it could possibly look like if parents choose to go to a court system or be in conflict, right? What are some of the other sort of tips or tools or actions that you use to approach tough cases? What are some of the other things that you consistently do to approach tough cases?
When you said you threw in somewhere in your question was the word reality. And I had an office once where in the conference room I had a sign made up. And the sign said the Reality Cafe. And that was in my conference room. And people, would kind of joke about it, laugh about it. But I used it as a tool for client, I would say, where are we? And they'd say, we're in your conference room. Then I would point to the sign and say, no, where are we? And they'd go, the Reality Cafe. And I'd say, right. And I said, and what do we serve at the Reality Cafe? And then they would look at me and I say, reality. And it would be a way to kind of playfully warm them up that they're going to hear something they don't want to hear.
That's a great way to start a mediation. That's a great tool to start something or go into conflict resolution, is to help people sort of understand that you actually get to make certain choices, but if the track that you think you're going on, then that track is I'm going to share like some of the stark realities of being on that track.
Really, this is the improvisational part of this moment, because, and I don't know if you know this, I mean, as long as we've known each other over a decade, I'm a huge jazz fan. And an aspect of jazz is improvisation. And I would like to say to you, boy, here's my 10, just reach into the pocket and pull it out. And these are the things I do with really difficult people to help move them along. I think you talk to people about what's their genuine self-interest. You try to get people to talk about, I sometimes talk with people at the beginning of the case. Most of the cases are a 2-year appointment. I said, where do you see us in 2 years? Because I'm testing, not testing, but I want to explore how much forward thinking are they doing? How much forward thinking are they capable of? And if I see that they can't or they're not, then I might engage with them as a joint effort. Well, let's think together about where we might be in 2 years. What seems possible to you? Again, because I need to stay in my own reality cafe and not succumb to my fantasy of, what's my fantasy is I wake up in the morning, I walk across the hall and go to work because I work from home. I open my computer and my inbox is empty. That's my fantasy. I want to engage with them about kind of, and depending, if they're new agey, I might talk about, let's astrally project into the future. Let's what does the future look like here? What does your family look like? Where is your kid in 2 years? What would you like your ex-spouse or the other parent, what changes would you like to see in them 2 years from now?
Yeah.
And then that grounds me in my reality cafe of who am I working with? And how can I then pull on those tools when we're in the trench and we're in a hard spot, and the work is frequently can be really grinding and grueling. And the more that there is this background of some connection of knowing people and knowing their aspirations and knowing what they want, gives me tools for working with them when things get difficult. Because somebody might really see the PC process, this ADR process, it's an alternative adjudicatory process. Right. I don't want to talk about the past. I don't want to talk about, because I'll ask, when I do my intake interviews with people, again, I want to be productive and I need to engage with people. So I improvise if I'm going down my protocol and the audience it's an audience of one. But if they don't like the tune, I need to shift to a different key or shift to a different melody or change the rhythm or say, you know what, let's turn the radio off and watch a movie, right? Because I'm looking to connect and elicit information. Right. So you got to be really alive in the moment doing that. And that's kind of a counterpoint, as it were, to the grindy, gruely piece of the work. It's where the work is really alive and very present, what's happening now, and attending to that with people.
Wow, there's so many things here that I want to speak to, but can you give me an example of when you've used this, where you said to a client in the reality cafe that, what does your 2 years look like? Let's just talk about setting expectations. Let's talk about what we want from this process. Let's talk about how we see our future or what we see there. Can you give an example of a good outcome of this process? And what did that look like? What are some of the things parents said to you, and how did you get there with them?
So I'm back to playing with the words a little bit. The parent coordinating part, and what's my lens, and how wide angle and how focused. So sometimes progress is built up of, it's really baby steps.
Right.
In the service, and sometimes you're not going to achieve the master plan. You're not aiming towards the goal because the conflicts are happening so fast and so frequently that one of my colleagues used the term with me recently about trying to drink wine. And I'm sure this cliche has been around for forever, but I'd never heard it. And she said, oh, and she goes, she said, it's like trying to drink water from a fire hose. And it was so tense. I'm forgetting what I asked her, because that was her answer to me. And I think I said, she's a coach in this case. And I think I said to her, can you and the other coach perhaps have a 4-way meeting? The 2 coaches and the 2 parents actually talk about this in real time. And her response to me was, nice idea, but that's going to be like trying to drink water from a fire hose. I understand the thrust of your question, right? And in this moment, and maybe it'll come to me before we sign off, I'm lacking a pithy anecdote that says, oh, this, here's the package where it all came together. Sometimes it's building little accomplished, it's all baby steps. It's like change for any of us. Let's get out of the family court system. Let's get out of psychopathology. Let's get out of conflict and just look at life for a minute. How do any of us ever make change? And yes, sometimes there is the epiphanous, the lightning bolt, but usually when the lightning bolt comes, we're saying, oh, please, I just had a lightning bolt, but it just struck you, right? But it's all baby steps.
Got it.
And it's building from that, where you're trying to build resilience. You want to build flexibility.
Yeah.
You want to build a capacity to listen, which means somebody has to be confident that when they speak, they're going to be heard. So all of that goes into the process. If I want a parent who's troubled by virtue of the fact that they've had to hire a PC, they're either, they're in a troubling situation at best. And so there's an aspect of it that, even though it is adjudicatory and I'm eliciting evidence and the PC is issuing court orders, there's that softer piece of the job that is relational, right? So for me to say to a parent, you know what, maybe you let dad win this one. Maybe you just acquiesce. But and you get all the resistance, and then sometimes I might push it. I said, I'm the accountant here. I said, if you kind of let this one go, I said, maybe we, there's going to be recurring conflicts. Maybe we think about taking terms with decision making.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the other piece of it that family law, and whether they're in the PC process or in the litigation process, and there's so many ways that kids just get mulched and lost in this. But one way is the adversary process. Whoever had the idea that adjudicating custody and dispute resolutions in an adversarial system makes a lick of sense was asleep at the wheel. And however, it truly is something that evolved. I don't know that anybody decided it. And this gets into, I'm not going to give a lecture on common law and, and due process rights and kids' rights and how we got to the place of adjudicating disputes in this way. But it's nonsense. And I know that I have colleagues whom I respect, who are smarter than me, who would say I'm dead wrong. And and it's largely nonsense as a way to resolve problems. But the piece of the adversary process, one piece of it that people don't hold on to, is there's a winner and a loser. It's binary. Yeah. And this kid has 2 parents, which means mom won, but dad lost. Mm. And guess what? This kid probably loves both parents. And now we've got a piece of this kid and a piece of with whom this kid identifies as a loser. And the winner, if you're locked in this kind of conflict, the winners are rarely gracious.
In this process, I have not seen any winner that was gracious, to be honest with you.
Right. So for what the reality of this kid is now is whatever the dispute is, and let's assume the kid's going back and forth between the homes, 50-50 timeshare. This kid has an ungracious, egoistic winner and a sullen loser as their parents.
Parents, yeah.
And whatever got won, whether it was the summer science program, whether it was 2 cello lessons a week or 1 cello lesson a week, or, whether it was hiring, the pitching coach or just being satisfied with the high school coach, these are all, I'm pulling all from a bank of conflicts. It is tainted. Whether the kid goes to that wedding in Indonesia or doesn't,
it's all tainted. It's all tainted.
And if you think about, I'm thinking of a book that I should not be thinking of, and it kind of dates me, but I'm thinking of R.D. Laing, the British psychoanalyst, in his book called The Politics of the Family, and kind of the insanity of nuclear family life in a healthy 2-parent system. But putting that aside, it turns a kid's life in everything into a contested, conflicted issue. Extracurricular activities, attention to homework, because some parents are more hard driving, the other parent is relaxed. Should there be a tutor? Should there not be a tutor? And it all gets freighted with this conflict. And all I have to say is that poor child. And so I will say to a parent, maybe your child's best interest is that you quit fighting. Maybe your child's best interest is that you care a little less about the outcome of this. Now, I need to also tee up that kind of comment, or else I can be out of a job or I don't get my next invoice paid, right? So so again, this goes back to the relational piece of the work, is you want to be able, hopefully, to speak frankly to people. But then you need to be speaking to them in a way that, in language and in terminology and with values with which they're going to resonate, and that aren't me imposing my values on them.
But I think at the end of it, what I feel like they really need to hear, and what you're saying, is that they need to hear from whichever direction, whatever it is, that everything that they do or don't do, every choice that they make or don't make, has an impact on this person or little people that is going to have an effect for their whole lives. And you're saying your approach is, okay, I'm going to be relational, humanistic, I'm going to have empathy, but I'm also going to have strict boundaries with parents. I'm also going to do reality testing, and I'm also going to tell them candidly, like, what are some of the things that they're doing that's impacting themselves and their child and their lives.
Right. And sometimes this because of your training as a therapist and your training as a mediator. It takes a deft hand. So if I get onto a phone call with mom or dad, and they're, in the beginning of the phone call is, you can't believe what that a-hole did this weekend.
Right.
And then what fires off for me? Well, if they need to discharge, and the a-hole may have really been an a-hole over the weekend, but I'm going to explore redirecting this. And I'd say, you know what? And sometimes I'll just take, so that they know they're heard, I'll actually say, we'll talk about the asshole in 10 minutes. Tell me how your kid's doing.
Right. You'll redirect, and then, yes.
But they're heard, and careful not to align. You're going to get to discharge. But I'm telling them sometimes, explicitly, what I'm really interested in is your kid. I'm less interested in your animus towards the other parent.
And that's a very specific tool that you speak to, because you're like, listen, I'm going to acknowledge what you're saying, and I'm going to come back to it, and I want to hear it. But first, priority is, I really want to hear what is going on with your child, because essentially at the end of the day, the child's best interest is what comes into play, whether I'm a minor's attorney, whether I'm a PC, whether I'm a parent, whether I'm just, parent's attorney.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because the California law is governed by, judges and PCs. We're to make orders on custody issues that are in the child's best interests. There's not a lot of definition as to what that is. You're looking at the health and welfare of the child, but how that gets conceptualized by each parent or by any given judge or by any given PC is, gets disputed. You told me long-term best interest, short-term best interests, kind of their psycho-spiritual interests. And then sometimes, what's best, the mere fact that the PC's been hired is we're very far from best, right? So sometimes what you're really, and this is back from my career in child protective services, you're never talking genuinely in an absolute sense about what's best. You're talking in a relative sense, what's the least bad? And by definition, the least bad becomes the best because that's the best alternative that's on the plate. And sometimes in certain situations, I'll tell parents, I'm saddened. I don't want to guilt people out. I don't want to make them feel bad, but I want to say, I'd love to make an order that's genuinely best. But those options aren't on the table because the conflict here is such that we can't get to those options. So you've put, or there's going to be I'm going to make an order, and it's going to be what I think is best of the available alternatives. But it's certainly in some absolute sense, this is not we can do better by your kid. Let's do better by your kid.
Well, David, here's my, by the way, I agree with all of that, and that's just some great food for thought that you've given for our audience. Here's my question though, I really want to understand your approach to a hypothetical situation. Let's just say somebody like me comes to you. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a mediator, I'm just a regular person. And I am having some conflict in my marriage, and I have children, and I have been told by friends and say, hey, you need to talk to David because he's not only a well-known family law attorney, but he's also a minors attorney, and he looks at children's best interests. That's one of the things he specializes in. Go talk to him and do a consultation. And I am not even anywhere close to a divorce or separation situation.
You're thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm in conflict, and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with a marital conflict, and it involves children. So what would you tell somebody like me, and what would your approach be to me? What would you tell me, essentially?
Well, see, I'm going to give you an answer that's going to frustrate your question and your listening audience, but I've got to be real, Deep.
All right.
So before I tell anybody anything, I'm going to do a lot of listening. Okay. So I'm going to try to give you something that your question is seeking.
Well, so you're saying you'll start off with just by listening to what I have to say.
Absolutely. It's key. Listening is, it's so essential.
Yeah, why wouldn't my audience like it? I would like somebody to listen to.
The fantasy, the notion is, you can't see I'm pointing to my right, which is my bookshelf with all of my family law legal texts and psychological texts and all of the books, that I've accumulated over close to 40 years of practice that inform my work. And you want to, that there's some, pithy anecdote of, here's the 10 things to do, but it starts with listening again. So before I would know which of those books I'm going to pull from and which conflict resolution system I'm going to think, would work, or is the situation, how well is the person actually apprehending themselves and the dynamic and the conflict? Right? So it's not uncommon just to pull from this, where especially in the areas of intimate partner violence, right? Where things are tolerated and people are victimized for long periods of time before they rally to get some help.
Yeah.
And these people, and it's not always just women, we know that, but it's often women. So they have become codependent and very accommodating and very excuse-making. And so I have, on occasion, had the experience of somebody wanting help who's actually quite victimized.
Right.
And so you're into that, again, another cliche. And I sometimes joke with parents when I'm in kind of shoveling cliches, and I say, geez, for X many hundreds of dollars an hour, this is what you get is, the cliche factory. But, sometimes there's situations where somebody's got to put on their oxygen mask before they can help somebody else. So if somebody's if I on an intake or a series of intake interviews, what's someone's insight in themselves? Are they somebody who would benefit, from therapy? Are they replaying a marriage, from their family of origin? Is there So I'm thinking about interventions for that person, for the family. How do they describe their child? What's their empathic capacities? How well do they understand the situation that they're in? What's the economic stability? What are the real world things that need to get solved and addressed? And sometimes people are not aware of both. They can have an exaggerated sense of the direness of their situation, and they also may not appreciate that they're about to be hit by an oncoming train.
So let me see if I understand this correctly and if I can play back what you said. So one biggest thing that you actually do is you just really listen to try and understand where this person is coming from and what's their specific situation. And some of the things that you would sort of look at is interventions, empathic capacities, interventions being therapy or parent coach or some other kind of support. And then you look at economic stability, real world things that they need to solve or address. So you look at all of these things, and what is some of the advice, if you give any advice in consultation, what is the advice that you would give, let's say, after exploring all of these things with the client?
Well, I might say I partner with people. And so, you may know this also from your professional life. There's often a drop dead question that if you ask to people, the conversation stops. And I'm poaching this. I didn't invent this. This is from Ram Dass. And it's the title actually of one of his books. And the title of the book is How Can I Help? And to actually say to somebody, what would you like me to do for you? How do you imagine I could help you? What sort of help are you seeking? Yeah. So I may have, after 20 minutes, a crystal clear diagnostic of, boy, this is where this is the intervention. This is what's going on with this dad. This is what's going on with this person. The kids are in, this distress. They need this intervention. Somebody needs to be able to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ram Dass,
I want to say, what is it you want me to do here? At what level do you want me to address your distress?
So let's say hypothetically, you ask that question, and I'm the client here, right? We're still in our hypothetical situation, and I say to you, David, what I really would like to help is that I don't want a divorce or a separation because I think we can salvage this. What are some of the things that I can do to reduce conflict in my situation?
Well, that quickly gets it out of my department, right? So, because the way you teed that up, is kind of more, it knocks at the door of a mental health intervention. So then I would explore with them what's been the history of interventions, right? So if I don't know this and I say to somebody, well, have you thought about getting any, before I would say to somebody, do you need help or do you want a therapist? I would say, how do you take care of yourself? What do you do for you? I'm hearing what you do for your marriage, what you do for your husband, what you do for your kids. What keeps you afloat? So it's about knowing, I talk to my mom every day at 2:00.
Right. But what if I told you, because I'm really trying to understand from a lawyer's perspective as opposed to a lawyer/mediator's perspective, right? What if I told you, I actually see a therapist and we've tried different things, and you may ask me, what are some of the things you've tried and whatnot? But what if I told you, I just want to ante this up a little bit. I want my partner or somebody to really understand that this is kind of getting serious and everything I've been doing so far is not helping me as an attorney, as a mediator, as a PC coordinator. Is there anything specific that you can tell me that I can do or
right?
Deploy?
And this is where I feel like you and I are in a little bit of a dance here with this Q&A. that you want. You are looking for the specific, what's the silver bullet here, and I'm just not giving it to you.
But why not?
You want that tangible thing.
Maybe in the years of experience you've come across this, and maybe there was that one tangible thing, or maybe there was that one thing that helped this one person. It could just be that too. And I'm not saying necessarily the same thing is going to work for everybody. I mean, that of course not, right?
And maybe this is, this probably reflects something about how I'm in the world and how I work as a professional, which I probably, especially I think related to other lawyers, I'm probably more process focused than outcome focused, because I keep taking your question where I'm not going to touch the silver bullet, but I'm going to the relational piece of it.
Okay.
I'm inhibiting myself because I feel like I'm still not answering your question. And I will tell you, the most aggravating thing to judges and to PCs is when people don't answer our questions.
Right.
And so I have become that aggravating person, the interviewee.
Not on my episode,
will
David.
not answer the question.
Stop that on my episode right now. Not just kidding.
Pendulum swing in terms of professionally in work. So I'm coming up on I'm trying to think when my 40th anniversary as a lawyer is in sight.
2 more years. Mm-hmm.
And I say the pendulum swing because I've done a lot of legal work, right? When I cut my teeth representing social services, prosecuting child abuse and neglect cases. I had about a 6-year period where I did other work, where I wasn't around custody. And then I represented kids and parents defending in, cases in the juvenile court, and then segued into family court and representing parents and doing a lot of representation of minors in divorce proceedings, because I had represented minors in abuse and neglect proceedings. And then I, got training as a mediator and did mediation and I've done a lot of trial work. I had a whole piece of my practice, which was an adoption practice in the foster care world. And so the last 10 years, I've really, been much more focused on parent coordination, alternative dispute resolution, and representing kids. And when I say the pendulum swings, my thinking about best interests has changed over time. My thinking about the policy issues, in the adoption world, the meaning of kinship, and what's the importance of biology, and how much do we weight the biological family versus the new creative family, the created family. And so I've had an opportunity to observe my own shifts in understanding. And one of the great things, I'm gonna pose to myself, a good question here for your interview, which is what's some of the things I really like about being a PC. And a piece of it is, to be a really good PC, you have to know your own mind. You have to know how you think. You have to know your biases. You have to know, I think, yourself really well to serve others and to serve the judicial system and the parents and the kids. To genuinely be of service, you got to be able to get out of your own way. And you got to be able to know your own BS. And that's a really fun part of the job. And so back to your hypothetical and the silver bullet. I might say to somebody, at some point, I've got a bunch of ideas about what might be helpful to you. But then it's an exploration of, do you want to hear that? So when I said about the pendulum, I've gotten more tepid about putting my advice out there. I actually want to know that someone wants it.
That's it. I want it, David. I want your advice. What are some of the thoughts that you're thinking?
And so then I might say, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to talk about, or I might put it down as questions, right? So because again, that's the lawyerly, the hedging part, and it needs, it's their life, it's their family, it's their kids. But you're hypothetical, back to because we're constrained. I'm going to let myself be constrained by your hypothetical. This person wants to save their marriage, right? So then that's easy. So then we look at, well, what do you see as the challenges? What interventions have you tried? What interventions have you contemplated? You say you're in therapy. What suggestions has your therapist made? Have those worked for you or not? What do you think your spouse would be receptive, your partner, and I'm not assuming they're married, but what do you think your partner would be receptive to? What have you tried? What has failed? And you partner with the answer rather than the answer being from this externalized me and my assessment of you in the limited time that we've spent together, and create some agency. Because if I'm sitting on some big idea and I can get the person to say, oh, I'm actually thinking that this might work, and then I can say, I'm having the same thought.
As you were saying the last part, in my head, I was just thinking, we're going back to your initial thought of just helping people understand in developing and empowering their own agency, helping people understand that, there are certain choices that you make. And what you're saying is that you're refusing to make some choices in order to have a compromise or have a situation resolved, right? So it's almost like things that you've always done, which is exploration, listening, thinking rather than giving ideas, asking more questions, and finally helping them figure it out themselves by just doing this curiosity process.
Yeah, and I can, and then it's also, and then what is it that I as a here's the things I can do as a lawyer. So a piece of its limits, right? So and this, have you thought about your marriage not working out? Do you want to explore what that would mean? Do you want to make a plan for that potentially happening? Do you, are there again, because I'm a lawyer, it would always be attuned to what their legal rights are, and then protect. Do you want to take action to protect your rights while you're making the bid to go into couple counseling? And it's a little bit of the Einstein thing where he would say, I think he had the quote, I probably have screwed this up, but you can't prepare for war and simultaneously prepare for peace. Well, you actually can.
In this context, yes.
So it's like, well, do you want to get your finances in order? Do you want to get the accounting sorted out? Do you want to understand these complex property issues about what's yours, what's ours, what's his? All the while, you're making this, you also want to invest in the saving the marriage, and you go to couple counseling. Hopefully I edged up towards answering your question. I don't know that I...
You did just a little bit. I'll give you a little bit credit, David, not a lot. I'm just really totally kidding with you. No, you really did. And I really like the approach that you kind of speak to, and all the questions, the tons of questions that you asked, like really understand and help and guide this person, before they get find themselves in a situation where they're with you, in front of you, as you being their PC, right? So,
well, so some people, let's take it back to PC, because that's why, if I wasn't, that's why we're talking here. There are families, wisely, who will hire a PC long before they're in a mess. And there's lawyers out there who will say, there's going to be some conflicts here, but you and your spouse or your partner have some capacities to communicate. And I think, and a good lawyer could suggest to somebody early on in the process, would you consider bringing on a PC to decide certain issues or make recommendations on issues to manage the conflict, reduce the legal fees, keep you out of court, and do it before you're bloodied and battered by 3 years of litigation and a few $100,000 in the hole and a stack of court orders, half of which have been followed or not, that would take a certain kind of family.
And a certain kind of professional to be able to bring that to them, because a lot of families don't even know that they could possibly have this option.
They don't.
Right?
That's correct.
Right. So it takes a certain person to be able to do that. Now, has anyone in your years of practice, even in the last 10 years of you doing PC work, has anyone ever turned it around and crawled out of Dante's hell? a family.
Yes. And then you're going to say, what did that look like and who and how?
Well, of course, it's confidentiality. I'm not going to ask who and how, but what did that look like? You already know what I'm going to ask you.
What it can look like is when they run out of money, when there's no more money to fuel fighting.
Oh, my Lord. Wow. Okay. I didn't see, after years of doing this, I didn't expect to hear that answer.
That's often what it looks like. All of a sudden, and sometimes, I mean, this is I don't know if it's a secret, but I mean, I've been in a consultation group for 10 years plus. I have lawyers and mental health professionals, and we all have different things in our practices. All we talk about is MPC issues and problems. And sometimes it's like, God, these people have been like, this family miraculously is just kind of getting along. And then you learn, well, somebody lost their job. So no, that's the cynical response.
Right. But I get that. But let me just really understand this. Are you saying to me that there's a couple of people or parents or certain percentage in that 1% of people who actually can stop their conflict and can do certain things based on the mere fact that they ran out of money?
Yes, but this isn't just limited to PCs. This is true of lawyers litigating divorce cases, right? Where all of a sudden the fuel, this gets back into the ways that the system perpetuates the problem.
Got it. And that's a whole nother episode for us.
So PCs, right? So it is an ADR. It is an alternative dispute resolution tool. It's still part of the conflict system, and it's still part of the family law system. And how any particular PC conceptualizes the A part of the ADR, alternative dispute resolution. Well, how alternative are you?
Right.
How far outside of the box are you going to go with this ADR intervention? And there's limits to it because you're appointed by a court order. So but within that, there's tremendous discretion with how the tasks are exercised.
Right.
So,
right.
But I want to get to the better part of the answer.
Thank you.
You're reaching for the imaginary cocktail, because that was really the bad part of the answer. Oh my God, it doesn't really work. People just go broke and surrender. It's got to be better than that.
Before you answer that, I do want to say that you've been doing this work for so long, and imagine that there's some hope, and that's one of the reasons you do this work. So having said that, I would love to hear your answer.
You want to appeal to the better angels of people's natures. You want to speak to that person on their shoulder that, is looking towards the horizon rather than down, that is playing on their empathy and their generosity and their compassion. And as they can cultivate those things, they're going to at least be better within themselves, happier within themselves. They're going to be a better partner. They're going to be a better parent. Right. So, I mean, I once told, I had the really good fortune among my teachers, but I really had the good fortune to really kind of mature as a lawyer when Judge Hitchens was on the family law bench.
Yes. That's incredible.
She gave me my first PC case. I've actually been doing this PC work for, 23, 24 years. And I didn't know what it was. And it was when they used to call them special masters. And she called and said, I'm going to appoint you to be a special master. And I said, I'm not sure what that is. And she goes, you'll figure it out.
That's Judge Hitchens for you.
She goes, you'll be great. And I said, and then I think she later, gave me the name of, she says, she gave me a name of somebody, as a mentor
doing the
person.
Work. Yeah.
Who amazingly, 15 years, 17 years later, had a hand in introducing me to my wife. So pretty incredible circle there. But some of it is humor. So sometimes somebody will bitch about the bill. I'll send a bill and they'll email me, or they'll want to have a call, and they'll say, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. And I said, well, are you doubting that all these things occurred? No. And I said, and we agree that I have these are legit. And I said, let's talk about how to bring your bill down. So that's really concrete. I said, let's really talk about like, how do you, so you got this, I said, why don't we set a goal for next month? And it could be a dollar value. It could be limiting the emails. It could be, you know what? We've talked frequently. I know you. I understand your kids. I understand the problem. Why don't we try 90 days of having just a monthly phone call? And what happens is they're saving it up. A lot of those things self-edit, drop off the mat. And so I'm just pulling one technique. You want to kind of technique. So one is the economic aspect of it. Now, a lot of these families, it doesn't matter. They're awash with capital. However, when they go to want to control the process, right? Because there's this freaking out of like, oh my God, I'm not in control. And I've had, people who have a net worth in the billions harping about a bill that's chump change compared to their net worth, even though it's a very meaningful bill to me to get paid, right? Because I'm paying a mortgage and doing all those things. Another piece of it can be promoting the interventions and being a cheerleader, right? So there's an aspect of that's the coaching piece of PC work is where do you want to go? And it's not any different than an athletic thing. Oh, you want to hit a 6-minute mile? Well, what do you have to, let's talk about what you got to do to get there. Oh, your spouse is still driving you crazy. Can we have and then you've got to tee up difficult conversations. So I say, I want to have a very specific conversation with you, Deepa. And this is not going to be fun. It's not going to be easy, but I want you to indulge me for 12 minutes of the next hour.
Got it.
Right? Are you ready? Are you prepared?
Yeah.
What do you think you do to provoke your spouse? I don't want to talk about them anymore. I want to talk about you.
So that's directive coaching, and I love these techniques. But circling back to my original question, was there a family or like parents or somebody that actually climbed out of this? Like, was there a successful?
Yes. I mean, the simple answer is that there are successes. There are people who develop the tools, have developed the capacity. And now a piece of it, and this as a therapist, the problem doesn't change. The other person doesn't change. The only thing that really can change is one's relationship to the problem.
To the problem. Got it.
So a piece of that is, and those are the aspects. So I've talked about coaching. Well, there's therapeutic aspects to the PC appointment. I am not a therapist. It says so in the document, the appointment document. It says so in my retainer agreement. And I don't practice mental health. Do I dispense? The lawyers used to be called counselors. Do I provide counsel as part of a PC service? You bet I do. Is it therapy? You bet it isn't. Is it helpful? Hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, and the reason I came back to that question is because I really, I think, want to give my audience that are listening like a sense of hope that, listen, I mean, even in the most adversarial situations, if you get the support that you need, if you do the things that you need to do in order to resolve it, there is hope that you can come out of these high conflict situations, but you got to do the work.
Yeah. And the work can be, there are people who turn to some of the texts. The work can be the individual therapeutic work. The work can be showing up. I can't tell you how many dads have said to me, I'm just seeing my kid, my taxi service. And I said, wow, you get alone time with your kid in the car without distractions. How great is that? So it's a reframing, and again, it's this what moment are you in? I said something recently to someone where can you believe that he said this, that this was the response in an email? And I said, I actually can believe it. I said it's entirely predictable. I said, what I can't, what I said, what would be an interesting surprise is if you had a different response to it.
So reframing, providing different perspectives, putting the mirror in front of them and showing them that they could just
and modeling that I'm not exercised by something outrageous. It's like, yeah, that's what they do.
Right. And saying
and they can they can see a calm.
Yeah.
In response to that, maybe they poach some of that.
I mean, just the idea of just reframing that, wow, yes, it's predictable and I can totally see this happening, but wouldn't it be great if just the response would be something unpredictable from you or the reaction?
So I'm going to pull an anecdote from a very high conflict family. And this is a family that is succeeding against great odds.
Yeah.
And it's another family where I brought coaches in. And the mom said to me, she goes, my job, she goes, my new approach is I want to be boring. And I said, well, what do you, what does that mean? And but they had internalized, they were repeating something that they got from the coaching. And I said, what is that? I said, I usually follow you. I said, but I'm not quite tracking what you mean here. And she said, I don't want to put out anything that's going to, I'm not going to be a doormat, but I don't want to put out anything that's going to stir things up. I'm going to ignore some comments. And I said, this is a positively brilliant plan. And so I was talking to my assistant today, and we were talking about this family. And I've worked with this family for years. So they're finally getting to some success. And I actually thought, and this just gets into kind of boundaries and the ways that I operate sometimes a little loosely and other people would be horrified. I'm going to send this mom a holiday card. And I'm going to say, I wish you a healthy, happy, and most boring 2024. And that's going to be my lighthearted way of really reinforcing that she's on a trajectory that I think is going to improve the quality of her family. And there are people who would say, oh my God, you're going to send a card, and you're not going to send one to the other. I'll send a card to the parent. There'll be a parallelism there. But this is, and is that going to be a game changer? I am probably not, but it's it's hard work. And people are in these hard situations, and it can't all be grime and drudgery and lesson and pedagogy. And they're also coming to a parent coordinator for a little bit of you got to put some air in the room. You got to, lift the shade and let some light in. You got to open a window because these people are suffering.
And to your great example of this parent who's really trying her level best to, sort of move forward in a way that makes sense. It almost feels like one person has to take that step to make the change.
And you sometimes talk about that there's a standoff and everybody's very locked into how they've been and change, and I'm, again, another teacher, I was a social worker I had met back when I was doing CPS cases, and she dropped, and this is, it seems like a pearl of wisdom, but it's like such a duh. And she said to me, new behaviors never feel natural.
Okay. New behaviors never feel natural.
It's
okay.
Awkward. It's, well, that's not me. Of course it's not you. You've never behaved that way before. We're talking about a new you. And so I'm kind of now on this thing about teachers. And one of the tremendous teachers I had in the Oakland Public Schools was my 7th grade gym teacher, who also taught economics in the 9th grade. And I had the good fortune to have him for that. And he was an amazing guy. And one of the things and I had occasion to use this with an NBA player when I was their parent coach, right? I was their parent coordinator. And this gym teacher had said to me, he said, the son, and he was really into gym and really into competitive sports. And he knew a lot about performance. So if he had you practicing free throws, he had you focusing on each finger and the pressure on the ball and the release in the wrist. And he really had an astute eye. He was a terrific teacher and coach. And
Mm.
so he would try to break a bad habit, whether he saw you
Mm.
at the plate with a bat, whether he saw you shooting a basketball. It's hard to break a bad habit because you got the habit. And then your performance dips because you haven't integrated the muscle movement in the memory. And he'd say, look, he actually said, he looked on her. He said, the sign of an athlete is somebody who's willing to look bad while trying to get better. And that gets you over the ego hump of the ego dinging of performing poorly because you're learning a new behavior.
Lessons from 7th grade that you took on, and that's such a great recipe for life. I feel like, just not parents, that's just such a great recipe for life. Can you repeat that sentence once again, please?
The sign of an athlete is someone who's willing to look bad while trying to get better.
Wow, that is truly a recipe for life, including the one that you spoke about, the social worker that said, when people are changing or making the changes that they need, or they make the change and they're going through that process and saying new behaviors never feels natural.
Oh, also, I'll suggest to parents sometimes I rewrite people's emails, right? It's like, you can't send that.
Yeah.
Right. And they haven't apprehended all of the directives, right? So these books, there's the Bill Eddy book, the Biff book, and all of the things that we want people to do, and they don't get it. So if they're really not getting it, right, you got to be with people where they're at. So I'm the parent coordinator, and I say, look, the email, like, you're having a hard time writing the email that is not filled with invective and sarcasm and denigrating and dehumanizing, and we don't want to do that. That's not good for your kid. It might feel good in the moment, but it's not helping. So you're going to send me the next draft of the email, and we're going to rewrite it together. And so then it's really a hand holding, word by word, sentence by sentence, as we walk through the email, right? Which sounds, I'm making it sound tedious and drudgery. It actually can be quite alive.
Yeah.
What's going on with you when you write this? Are you writing this at 3 a.m. behind 3 drinks? Or did you write this when you woke up in the morning? Are you thinking, how are you, and then you get into empathy. How do you want to be heard here? What are you imagining? How are you imagining this sentence lands?
Right.
How would you be feeling if you received this email? What do you think your kid would be thinking if they got into your computer, which if they're over 11, they will, and your kids saw you talking to their mom or dad like that? How do you think that would play? Is this how you would want your daughter or son to be talking to their boyfriend or girlfriend or a friend? So in these things that seem like drudgy and tasks are loaded with very alive ways to teach people. And a piece, and if there isn't a co-parent counselor, guess what? The PC is doing that modeling and that teaching.
And what you really spoke about, David, in my world, and I guess in your world too, is that you initially started talking about more directive coaching and sometimes maybe rewriting the emails, but then you ended that with asking a lot of open-ended, reflective questions where you went into non-directive coaching, where, and circling back to helping parents understand how their own actions, their own behaviors, aside the intention, has a larger impact, and understanding that impact and then modifying and changing or revisiting or having another perspective on that, right? So you kind of spoke to more, as you close that out, to more non-directive coaching.
Yes, and I also want to be really clear. It's not always so warm and touchy-feely. If I'm delivering the message for the 10th time, I may very directly say, knock that shit off.
Right. You're like...
Just like that. I'm going to say, look, and I'll get the last invoice because they're complaining about the time. And I'll say on July 3rd, on July 9th, and July 27th, we had phone calls where this was the subject of the phone call. And now we're in September. I said, what's going on? Did you not understand it? In which case I'll try to explain it differently. Do you not agree with it? Do you want, is it, and then you get to unpack it, then you're into kind of what's happening here. But then you've got to also, this gets back to the willing to look bad while trying to get better. Well, I can't do that. That's not me. And then I get to say, depending on the person, well, who are you?
I mean, David, you've been doing this for almost like in 2 years, it'll be 40 years. What are you thinking as you look ahead for 2024? What is your recipe for 2024? Recipe for life for 2024?
I'm getting to start to do something this month. I'm getting to, when I say I want to think about the cases, I may want to make some final, contribution to the field that isn't service related. I may want to write something. So to me which means I have to have time to think about something. So I want more time. I'm approaching, I don't know when I'm going to retire, but I turn 69 next year. And, so whether it's retire or transition to some, take this skill set and be willing, am I willing to look bad while trying to get better?
Yes.
And
that's a big point, right?
Is the ego strength there for me to say, I think I want to try this thing, but I'm at a place now where I'm in a deep, I know my work, right? I know how to be a PC, and there's a great comfort in knowing, even though there's in any given moment, right? You're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do here. But generally, I know the court system. I know the world that I'm inhabiting, and I'm very fortunate for me because I'm in a world where I really have my feet in two worlds, which is the legal world and the mental health world. And both are passionate interests. So I've been, not really lucky because I've crafted this, but there's an element of luck, in life. I think a life well lived, and there is some luck, and I'm incredibly fortunate. And so what, so my recipe for next year is to think about, well, what's next? How to do a little bit less of this and maybe more of something else, and whether it's personal or professional, I don't know yet. I'd like to start more days with, I met a woman that I went to law school with, and we shared our first job together, and we've gone very different professional trajectories, but we started the day, we met for a walk, out in a nature preserve this morning. I'd like more of that in 2024. I'm planning, some travel. And I want to get a chance to think about this. You've been very evocative in this interview today, and in thinking about sitting down together to talk about this. For all the joking, I took the run up to this quite seriously, and it's really had me thinking about the work and service and kids and family life, and how to continue to make a contribution.
David, as always, the world is your oyster, and I know whatever it is that you do, you're just going to be so skillfully good at it that I wouldn't be surprised at anything that you do in the next year. But having said that, what I do want to do, and what I do want to say to you, and I've said this to you before, is that I would love for you to explore the world of leadership and executive coaching,
But I want to share with you something, and there's really, I don't know where this is going, and I know that we're winding up here, but I had a professor at Berkeley, and I took a lot of courses with him. I just really, really loved this guy, and my focus was political theory as an undergraduate. And so this was in a survey course with him on international relations. And it was not my first course with him, but it's a survey course, right? You're a freshman or sophomore, and they're introducing you to concepts of global relations and countries. And he gave us an assignment, and this was the first assignment in the class, to understanding international relations. And he led us on this exercise of thinking about our families. And he goes, I want you to think about your family, and you had to write this essay, and he said, you have two questions. He said, who had power in your family, and how did they exercise it? I have no idea what I wrote, but it was a mind-bending exercise.
Gosh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think about that in working with these families. There is a power dynamic, and sometimes the kid has got it and shouldn't have it. But there's an aspect of that in, I think you get into this more from the therapeutic end. I'm not trained as a therapist. I don't know in an academic sense family systems, but I think there's a big role for that. And because it is the court system and orders and lawyers and money, and there's all sorts of types of power. But I do bring some of that training, that I, learned in my international relations class at 19, who's got power here and how are they exercising?
Right. And wow. I mean, in closing that, I mean, in our life, in our sort of like relationships, when we have power, how do we choose to exercise it? And that tells us so much about how we operate in conflict and how we operate in general in many situations.
And it's back to you're not the boss of me, is I want to empower parents to not need my services. And ironically, for them to be empowered to get rid of me and take back control of their lives has to do with them generally listening better, compromising more, being a little more understanding, giving somebody a benefit of the doubt, or realizing that their ex is an a-hole, and how are you going to be the only thing that you ultimately have control of is how you respond to them and what's working for you and what's working for your kid.
This is such a powerful conversation and so much food for thought. And really, thank you for coming here and being you and sharing all this wealth of knowledge that you have.
Thank you, Deepa.
I truly hope you write a book. I really do.
We'll see.
Hey, this is Deepa again. I hope you really enjoyed my show today. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation. If you'd love to get in touch with me or my guest, or would like the show notes, resources, or links, please reach out to me on my website. I would also love your feedback. Until next time.